So my number three is A Better Tomorrow from 1986. This is a film directed and co-written by John Woo, starring Chow Yun-fat, Leslie Chung, and Lung Ti. The IMDb plot summary: a reforming ex-gangster tries to reconcile with his estranged policeman brother, but the ties to his former gang are difficult to break. So I'll talk a little bit first about why this film is on my list, and then love to hear your thoughts on it, and then I'll kind of dive more into the film. But it's actually interesting talking about this right after we just talked about Wings of Desire, because the reason for me that this movie is on my list, which I saw this for the first time in high school, is it opened my eyes to the fact that foreign films were not always just art films like Wings of Desire. Or, I mean, at this time I had watched a lot of, like you said too, French films was sort of my introduction into foreign films, but these were all classic French New Wave, definitely art films, art house films, famous like films versus movies is the way a lot of people describe it. And this movie, which is a Hong Kong action film, is something where I realized after seeing this, wow, like foreign films can be genre films and can have the same types of experiences and emotions I get when watching a film out of Hollywood, but they come from another country. But then also at the same time too, it sparked a lot of my interest in Asian cinema, coming in through Hong Kong and John Woo, then got into films of Jet Li, Zhang Yimou, and really all these different types of films from China and Japan that were not the typical like Kurosawa, again, art house famous. And I'm not knocking Kurosawa at all. Like I love all those films. I love all these French films, and I like Wings of Desire, but I was opened my eyes to the international cinema was not just art house cinema. And I love this movie, which we'll get into. But I'm curious if you had seen this film before and what your reaction to it was.
Yeah, I had not seen this movie before. It's kind of fun to see where John Woo comes from and, what got him started. And you can see how he's gotten even more stylized and I guess Hollywoodized as time went by. But the origins of what he's good at is there even in this movie. The other thing I would say, this movie felt so familiar to me because growing up in India and watching Bollywood films and especially movies from the 80s, like this plot line is just so typical of the movies that I grew up watching, and the fast cuts and so much information is just like, glanced over quickly, and the melodrama of it, of the relationships and everything. I mean, the only thing missing from this movie for it to be a Bollywood movie is the song and dance sequences. Like you added those, this would be a Bollywood film, like everything, like to the point that I was watching it with my partner and he was having trouble kind of, oh, what happened there? What happened there? I knew the plot the moment it started. Exactly. I knew who's who, who's what, what have you. It was so funny to me that this felt so familiar. And I didn't know that going in.
That's really fun. And I was actually really curious to hear your take, knowing that, again, growing up not in the United States and watching films that were not Hollywood films, obviously they're not all going to be the Indian film that might be nominated for, best foreign film. Like that was sort of my perception of what foreign films were. There were these more heady, artsy. It was not just these action blockbusters. And not, again, I'll get into more of that. I think this movie's a lot more than just that. But this, I'm sure, was not as much of I don't know, surprise is the right word, but I'm not surprised to hear that you feel so. This is, oh yeah, I've seen a billion films like this, especially now after gone back and watching a lot more Indian cinema too. That is not just the films that are nominated for Best Picture or Best Foreign Film. I'm like, oh yeah, no, there's all of this. There's some threads that are very, very similar on that whole like Southeast Asian action film. It's just, I can see that now. It's like it's a very familiar kind of, the beats are familiar, the action set pieces are familiar. It's that's really funny to hear you say that.
I mean, we call them, I mean, there's maybe a little bit more violence in this movie than what I was used to growing up, but in general, we call these movies masala films. Masala is sort of like a spice mix, if you will. So there's a little bit of everything for everybody sort of thing. Action, and there's romance, there's melodrama, what have you. So yeah.
That's fun. Well, so I came to this film, like I said, in high school, and I had watched Face Off, which is one of John Woo's Hollywood pictures. And I was like, this is the best movie I've ever seen. Like, I love Face Off, which maybe that'll come up in a future episode potentially. But I was like, where'd this guy come from? And then I went online, and this is like super early days of the internet, but there was still IMDb. And I was like, oh, he's like made a bunch of other films. And I was like, okay, what's like the most famous, best one to start with? And found some reviews said, oh, you got to start with Better Tomorrow. That was the beginning of his aesthetic and everything. So like, okay. And it was actually very hard for me to find the movie. I had to go to, there was not at the video store, there was not going to be a Blockbuster. And I went to actually through our library system in my hometown and found I could like order it through the library to get like the VHS copy of this. So it was tough to track down. I mean, it's funny to say this now. It's very easy to just go into Prime Video and search for A Better Tomorrow, and then boom, you can immediately watch it. But back then, these types of films were hard to find. So that sort of added another mystique to it. Of like, oh, this is like, how am I going to get hold of this? And then I finally watched it and was just immediately blown away by, yes, the action. It's all the John Woo, slow-mo action, gunshots being over exaggerated. Like when you fire a gun, it's almost like you're firing a cannon and the people get thrown back against the wall. And there's a lot of squibs and blood sort of shooting out. And that was something that definitely was not the way American action films were, even in the 80s, which was sort of the height of that. It was definitely a lot more exaggerated. And, a lot of John Woo's techniques of showing the person shooting and the person getting shot in the same shot. So you can see the cause and effect of violence, which is a big trope for him too. But there's also a lot of depth in this movie as well, which is something, again, it sounds like you are used to this because it was in Indian cinema, but in US action movies, the melodrama is not there. There's a very simple plot. Like in Die Hard, okay, Bruce Willis has to do this, but it's not all about these human relationships. And, John Woo, one of his signature styles too, is male relationships, friendships, familial relationships, things like that. And this movie is a lot about that. The two brothers, one's a cop, one's a criminal, how they're dealing with their relationship. And then Chow Yun-fat as the friend, and they're all making these decisions in their lives. And where does that lead them? And then there's a flash forward of, 7 years after a deal gone wrong and where their lives are at, how they're coming back together. Like all of this drama is something that I was not seeing in action movies at the time. And I think John Woo even brings that to a lot of his American films too, like Face Off, Mission Impossible 2, Broken Arrow. These all deal with like the duality of two men and how they're different, how they're the same, and how they go up against each other. And I just was, again, surprised to see all this in a movie where I was expecting something just to be an action shoot 'em up. But John Woo is one of my favorite directors, and this is sort of the beginning of that exploration too. I went off and then tracked down all the rest of his films. And then also too, Chow Yun-fat is one of the coolest movie stars ever. And the beginning of this film, when he's there and there's so they're counterfeiters as the crimes that they're committing. And during the opening title sequence, they're showing like the criminals sort of showing up, and Chow Yun-fat's one of them at the counterfeiting office. There's this incredible shot where he lights his cigarette with like a burning like $100 bill, like counterfeit $100 bill. And he just went with the sunglasses and just like, oh my God, this guy's like the coolest guy ever. So in watching this movie too, I was like, who is this actor? Like, he's amazing. And I go back and find a bunch of old Chow Yun-fat movies. But yeah, this is a lot of things for me. I mean, it's not my favorite John Woo, have to be The Killer, but this is the one that kind of started my appreciation for international cinema that wasn't all just art films.
No, I totally get that. Yeah, it was a fun ride. Like I said, to me, this is just so familiar.
Right. It wasn't fresh and new to you. Yeah.
There's nothing except for, I guess, the oozing blood and what have you. The one thing I was thinking about as you were just speaking is that this shows how global storytelling and cinema has become now, that this kind of action now feels actually very Hollywoody to me.
Oh, definitely.
And it didn't, and it's probably because of people like John Woo and such operating here, where these slow-mo shots and I guess Tarantino brought a lot of this because I know loves a lot of Asian cinema and such as well.
Woo,
so
yeah.
So it's interesting that what felt maybe different maybe is not that different anymore.
That's totally true. Oh,
yeah.
I mean, I think definitely, especially in the 90s when John Woo did come to the States, but not only did they come to the States and he made some films in Hollywood, but for sure, Hollywood action films completely cribbed his style and brought it into mainstream Hollywood. I think now we've moved away from that. It's true. There was a period of time where the John Woo style action was really in, which was like mid to late 90s, maybe a little early 2000s. And now we've moved away from that. But oh yeah, definitely he was very well known amongst, I mean, Quentin Tarantino, like you said, talks about him all the time of an influence on a lot of films that he made, and just especially like The Killer, being like, oh my God, this movie's so great. And for sure, I think John Woo influenced a lot. And so you're right. It is, especially going back to this, you see, you're putting this up against an American film, Hollywood film from 1986, and you see there's a stark contrast. But then you watch this film against an American film from 1996, action film. It's like, oh, this is the same. It's the same thing. So for sure, Hollywood absorbed the John Woo aesthetic and style for sure. I mean, he set the template for 90s action.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then on the, I guess, melodrama and the relationship aspect, I guess the other thing I would throw in there, which is also, I think, representative of Asia, or really anywhere, but more so Asia. So Asia is sort of the class conflict as well, right? Like these are all people who are seeking more than what they have.
Right.
And that's sort of a big driver. And you kind of see those dynamics play in their relationship, especially when you fast forward 7 years, where the young intern protege guy is sort of now the head honcho.
Yeah.
And everybody else is elsewhere, and you want more from your life, and that's sort of what the driving force is anyway, which I guess is universal. But I don't know, I find that quite relatable in that sense of the kind of movies I grew up watching. The other thing I would say that maybe is not here, and sorry to make this about this movie versus like Bollywood films.
No, I think I'd love to. Yeah, I love that comparison
the other
you're making. Yeah.
the other contrast, I suppose, is there's always like a predominant kind of familial parental character in these movies in Bollywood films, especially the mother character. That, and they didn't explore much of that. Like the father gets killed, spoiler alert, pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And you don't really find out much. And it sounded like he knows about what the older sibling has been up to, because he asked the cop guy to kind of forgive him. But I would have loved to see a little bit more of that. Like there's not much sort of character development of, depth. Like all the emotions are very much kind of on the surface, versus I think, especially as a kid, what would pull me in is that, because you knew that the mother went through all this, and maybe she was a single mom or what have you, and this is why things are the way they are. And at some point, maybe the mother sort of becomes the pivotal tension point between the brothers, because she's siding one over the other. In fact, there's this famous Bollywood movie from the 70s where it's this kind of similar plot. One brother is the cop and the other brother is this criminal head honcho Don kind of person. And he says, the Don guy is like, I have everything, palaces and cars and what have you. What do you have? And he's like, I have mom.
Oh,
boom, mic drop. That line is sort of like still is iconic in Indian cinema. So that's the stuff that at some point this stuff becomes surface level to me, I think, as much as I had a fun time. But I guess I'm more used to the melodrama even cooked further.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that, because I'm going back in my head now and thinking about all the John Woo's films, and it is a lot about two men friendships or brothers and how they're different or the same, but there's not a lot of at all sort of parents, mothers or fathers at all in his, like, that must just not be how
even romantic relationships. The poor girl has nothing to do.
Yeah.
She's just like running around,
Yeah, his characters and his movies and his, I guess, his art is very much male dominated, and again, male relationships, and the women. There are some, like in The Killer, there's a woman that he's trying to save or what have you, but it's more about the two killers' relationships with each other than it is the woman. So I'm trying to think. I wonder if that is a difference again between maybe Indian cinema and Chinese or Hong Kong, where they're more focused on brothers or men versus like parents and children. Because now that you say that too, in the Bollywood films that you put on this podcast so far that I've seen, the mother characters, and that is that there's always some pivotal scene where the mom comes in, and the parent and the children also seem very deferent to the parents, of like, okay, parents, what do I do? Like, even though there might be like 35, 40, they're still, the parents are still a major part of their lives, and they lean on them for a lot of different ways. So I wonder if that's just a specific to India, just culture, which I find fascinating.
Definitely is. Yeah, for sure. Which I would think that a lot of Asian culture outside of the Indian subcontinent also has that. So it might just be
a
John Woo thing that he's just not explored or not interested in that side. Which,
right. He's not. Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.